the dock with silverdoctors.com. Joining us today for a special report on a variety of topics affecting the markets this week, notably the Greek crisis and Puerto Rico, as well as a couple other topics we'll talk about, is Bill Holter, recently joining Jim Sinclair's team. It's great to have you on, Bill.
Thanks, Doc. Happy to be here.
Long been a follower of your work, and it's great to finally get you on the show here.
Good to finally be on.
All right, well, let's start right away, Bill, with Greece. We're recording this here on Wednesday, July 1st. Less than 24 hours ago, Greece officially defaulted on their IMF payment. So let's break down the implications. Obviously, we have potential derivative implications here. So let's get your take on the subject of Greece right now and where we stand here Wednesday afternoon, July 1st.
Sure. Actually, officially, they didn't default. It's not been called a default, and that's the key right there. They didn't make the payment. They more than likely won't make the payment, and they can't make the payment. To you and I and the normal person, that's a default. Now, the key is if it's classified as a default, right, that will trigger all of the credit default swaps that have been written on 320 billion euros. The way the credit default swaps work, Company A can go to Company B and work out a CDS, and typically there are $10 worth or 10 times the amount of credit default swaps as there are actual debt. So it's kind of like call it a homeowner's insurance policy that you buy on your next door neighbor's house and you start throwing matches over the fence. It's a way to speculate, in other words. You can speculate that Greece is going to go bankrupt and profit from that. So it's not just the 320 billion, it's more like 3 trillion. And the problem being the liquidity globally right now has been shrinking, and there's not an extra 3 trillion euros floating around for the writers of CDS to pay for the winners of CDS.
So that comes to the question, is the ISDA going to simply declare it not a default and basically negate any of those derivatives contracts from triggering? Right,
that's exactly it. They can't call a default if they do, it triggers. So yes, they're going to try to do whatever they can possibly do to not classify it as a default. Maybe they'll classify it as a moratorium, who knows, but the reality is it's a default.
Right. Now for listeners who may not quite understand the implications of why the ISDA may not want to declare a default, for those listeners, paint a picture here of what would happen within 24 hours if it is actually declared a default on those 3 trillion in CDS agreements.
Well, what happens is that 3 trillion can't be paid out because it doesn't exist to be paid out. I mean, you've got the big writers of CDS, for instance, Deutsche Bank is one of the big writers. They don't have hundreds of billions in capital that they can pay out, and if they do, then it impairs their balance sheet. And I mean, you're looking at J.P. Morgan and Deutsche Bank, just the two of them have written $70 trillion worth of derivatives. And the owners of those derivatives, if they're in a winning position, they puff up their balance sheet. In other words, they're showing the gains on those derivatives, but they're never going to be paid out. So the winners become losers because the losers go under, go belly up, and they can't pay. So it creates a break in the chain or a domino effect or whatever you want to call it. But it's truly like what happened after Lehman Brothers. And this time around, there's no white knight. The central banks have spent all their bullets. They've already lowered rates basically to 0%. And you've got, this time around, it is sovereign governments that are in trouble. It's not just mortgage-backed securities. It's not just brokerage houses and banks. It's actually sovereigns.
And I'm curious here, Bill, I know you've been in contact with Jim Sinclair. Does he believe Greece will be a Lehman event, that they made a mistake and let Greece go down? Or does he think that the ISDA is going to declare all these null and void and not a default?
Well, he just put a piece out yesterday I think it was titled something like, "The world has already died, you just don't know it yet." And basically that's what he's saying, is that Greece is an event, it's a default, it's a default sequence. It on its own could start a domino effect. I know some people, just over the last, especially 2 or 3 weeks, as this was coming closer and closer to the deadline, a lot of people have been saying, oh, it's going to be a non-event, it's in the market, it's already priced in. Well, no, it's not priced in. That's ridiculous. Greece owes, let's just look at their core debt. They owe 320 billion euros. They clearly can't pay that. They can't even make the 2 billion euro payment yesterday to the IMF. Now the bulk of that, and this is the argument, the bulk of that is on the balance sheet. The ECB has taken it on, and the IMF has taken some of it on. So what people are saying is, oh, well, Greece can default and it's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal, because now you're talking about impairing the balance sheet of the ECB. And the only way they can fix their balance sheet is by printing more euros. So you're talking about a massive liquidity event that will force the ECB to do something that they don't want to do. The other aspect to this is, will Greece stay in the Eurozone or will they leave? And the way I understand it is, there is no legislation in the original, when they originally set up the Eurozone, there is no legislation that allows the ECB to kick anyone out.
From my understanding, actually, Bill, it has to be a unanimous decision, including the country leaving. So Greece would have to agree with it.
So what I'm saying is, they can't be kicked out unless they say we want to leave, unless they agree to it. And the way this has worked is, if they stay in the Eurozone, then their debt will stay on the balance sheet of the ECB. If they leave the Eurozone, which is what it looks like the ECB has been just recently pushing for, then all of that debt that the ECB has taken on from the various banks in Europe, that debt would go back onto the books of those banks and be valued at whatever they're valued at, 10, 20, 30% of par, or whatever. Then you're talking about a banking systemic failure, because you're looking at humongous black holes of balance sheets. So it's one or the other. It's either the individual banks or the ECB itself. Somebody is going to eat it. There's going to be a loss taken somewhere. To answer the question to the people that say, oh, this is in the market, it's no big deal. No, it is a big deal.
No, while staying on the topic of Greece, Bill, let's shift topics just slightly and discuss what's next for the Greek people, the Greek depositors. I mean, right now they're seeing capital controls, banks are closed, pensioners are allowed to pull out some measly number. I can't remember if it's 60 or 80 euros a day.
Right.
What is your take? What seems like the next step to me is going to be the Cyprus template that Dieselboom said was a template, then wasn't a template, and is the template again a couple of years ago with Cyprus. The bail-in. Is that what's coming?
Exactly. Yes. That is obviously a logical next step. I would say any Greek who's not gotten their money out of their banks several months ago are idiots. I mean, they had to see this coming, and for us to see huge lines, hopefully it's just for the few remaining hundreds or a few thousand euros that they left in their bank. Hopefully, we were seeing a billion or 2 billion a day last week leaving. So yeah, there's been exodus, there's been a bank run, an electronic run, physical run, but anybody who left the bulk of their account in there, that was just a huge error. And as I understand it, the shelves of many stores, grocery stores, etc., they've already been stripped bare or are being stripped bare. And they probably won't be replaced either, because when we're talking about the whole system runs on credit, and if credit shuts down, those stores are not going to be able to restock their shelves. And that's what I've been saying about here in the U.S.
And those store shelves, whether it's here in the U.S. or Greece, grocery stores don't have 2 weeks worth of inventories. They run on just-in-time inventories, and they run on
3
about
days.
2 or less. A lot of them run on
Right.
maybe 12 hours of inventory. So just a normal sales. I mean, you can see that here in the U.S. when you have at least here in the Midwest. I know down by you in Texas, you don't get a lot of big snowstorms, Bill, but just in the winter when we have a normal snowstorm coming with, say, 2, 4, 6 inches, store shelves are empty on Sunday afternoon.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, you're right. And it's all a function. The system works because credit flows. But if credit ceases for any reason, then you're going to see distribution break down.
And that's where the panic sets in.
And that's why you need to have what you think you're going to need, whether you think it's going to be a 2-week event or a 2-month event or 6 months or whatever, have what you think you're going to need ahead of time. Because when whatever happens, whatever event it's going to be that triggers the breakdown in credit, when that happens, you're going to be fighting in the store to get whatever you can, because once the shelves are empty, they're empty.
And Bill, what would you say to the person listening to the show who maybe new to silver doctors, or they haven't paid much attention to finance at all? Certainly in the back of their mind, whether it's Cyprus or Greece, most people's thoughts on the street is that could never happen here. Even when we're talking about Puerto Rico here, it's not the mainland. That could never happen here. What would you say to those types of person, and how would you advise them to prepare now?
Well, I would first say that mathematically it is going to happen here. There is zero doubt in my mind that the credit system is going to break down. From top to bottom, from government to the individual or bottom to the top, the system has taken on more debt than can be paid back. So you're going to have a breakdown in credit. And I know in the various interviews that I've done, I've seen people write in and say, "Oh, well, it's just another yay rah rah interview for gold and silver." Yes, you need gold and silver, but that's for people who have capital. People who don't have a lot of capital, you need food. Start off with food. Think to yourself, what happens if the lights went out? What would I need? You need a way to purify water. You need food to eat. You need a way to cook it. You need a way to get around, like a bicycle or a horse or whatever. You need to start with the basics. And then when you work your way through the basics and you've stocked up on your medicines, because you're not going to be able to get medicines for a time. And like I said, I don't know how long this is going to last, but I suspect it'll be at least a month to 2 months where distribution is going to be spotty. Once you get your basics taken care of, then you look at your investments. Now, do you believe your bank is going to stay open? Do you believe that your X amount of dollars in the bank is still going to be X amount of dollars in the bank? I know some people say, "Oh, well, it's FDIC insured, I'm covered." Well, the FDIC has less than 1/4 penny for every dollar that they insure. So you're basically relying on a broke institution of a broke government to insure your money in a bank that, if and when goes under, is broke. Same thing goes for your brokerage house. Same thing goes for your insurance policies. And that's why you look to silver and gold. And I've always said you start with silver, because silver is going to spend. If everything totally breaks down, junk silver should work. You should be able to go to a farmer and get some eggs. You should be able to barter with silver. The problem with silver is the portability. I mean, $100,000 worth of silver, there's no way you're carrying that. You're talking hundreds of pounds. And that's where gold comes in. Gold will get your wealth from the current system today, which is a debt-based fiat system, into whatever the new system, the next system, after a reset occurs, looks like.
Well, we're on the topic of debt crisis, Bill. Overnight, our esteemed president gave a promise that neither Greece nor Puerto Rico would have any real implications here in the U.S. It's kind of I'm sure it made you smile as it did myself. So let's talk a little bit about Puerto Rico.
Yeah, it reminded me of Alan Greenspan talking about everything was contained.
So why don't we talk a little bit about Puerto Rico?
Their governor, I guess it was Monday, came out, and that was on top of the Greek news. The governor of Puerto Rico came out and said basically, we're insolvent. They've got, I think it's $72 billion that they owe, and they're talking about in order to pay, they need to restructure, and that really whacked the bond insurers. If you look at MBIA stock, for example, was down 23% on Monday. Very reminiscent of 2008 because the bond insurers have issued all kinds of insurance on these $72 billion, and they basically are insolvent. They're like Detroit or worse. The thing is, throughout all the years, I can remember as a broker years and years ago that the saying was, oh, well, Puerto Rico's AAA rated because they're not actually guaranteed by the government, but the government will never let them go down. And I guess we're going to find out.
It'll certainly be interesting to see how that plays out. Well, let's transition here to the story that I think our listeners really want to hear about, and I know that you want to discuss as well, is the big report that J.P. Morgan has cornered the commodities derivatives market.
Yeah, I wrote about that yesterday. That's truly a head-scratcher. I mean, nobody has a definitive answer on this. I guess the derivatives attributed to precious metals went from $200 billion at the beginning of the first quarter to 3.8 or 3.9 trillion at the end of the first quarter. So it's 90 days. They took on 3.5+ trillion in derivatives. We don't know whether they're long. We don't know whether they're short. We don't know whether it's silver, whether it's gold. Could be platinum, could be palladium. I've even seen speculation that it was oil. But you're talking about over $3 trillion. Just to put that in perspective, total global gold production for the year is 80 million ounces. So you're looking at call it $100 billion. 3.5 trillion, that's 35 years worth of global production. That's insane. And like I said, you don't know whether they're long, you don't know whether they're short. There has been speculation and some anecdotal evidence that J.P. Morgan has accumulated a pretty massive physical silver position. I've heard 350 million ounces in that neighborhood. It's my speculation that you're going to see COMEX go force majeure for some reason. And basically they're going to close and they're going to say, okay, we're going to do a cash settle, which means the shorts will have won, the longs will have lost, and those owning physical will be the winners. I mean, if they were to force majeure silver right now, and J.P. Morgan is truly sitting on 350 million ounces or more, and they force majeured, they get to close out their paper short position at a profit, and they're sitting on, what is that, 11,000 tons of silver. I mean, that's huge. So they profit on that side. It's just a speculation on my part, but if you put that together, that seems likely to me.
So you think it's likely that J.P. Morgan has amassed the physical silver position that's been speculated, and that they're going to try to induce a force majeure in the paper contract to massively revalue their physical hoard then?
I don't know if they're going to try to create a force majeure. I mean, there could be a force majeure for any number of reasons. To address, do they have the 350 million ounces? They very well may. I've seen some credible evidence that shows they've been accumulating physical metal. Is the number 350? Is it 300? Is it more? I don't know. I mean, there's no way to truly tell, but it does look to me like they have been accumulating physical metal. And if you put those two together, if you put together the fact that they've been a or the major short in the silver market, which pushes the price down, and thus allowing them to buy physical cheaper than they otherwise would have. How do they unwind? How do they unwind that long short position? The way to unwind it is a force majeure. The force majeure says, okay, the market didn't open today, but we're going to cash settle at last night's price.
All right. Before we wrap it up, any other topics you want to discuss or cover? I think the listeners should be paying attention to right now, Bill.
A couple things I pay attention to. Going back over the last 6 weeks, we've seen tremendous volatility in the global credit markets. For instance, the German Bund went from 0.04%, call that zero, and traded all the way up to 1%, and did that in less than 4 weeks' time. That is a 20-plus fold rise in interest rates. That's a crash in the bond market. And we've seen it. We've seen the Japanese market. Their credit markets have been hugely volatile. We've seen U.S. interest rates hugely volatile. So I would keep an eye on the credit markets. I'm also hearing now that in the shadow banking system, liquidity has been tightening over the last few months, and it very well could become critical within the next month or two. Liquidity, the Fed was running around with a fire hose with the QEs and shut the QE off, and now liquidity is starting to dry up, and you cannot have a debt-laden system that's short on liquidity. It dies.
All right. Certainly several things to keep an eye on over the next couple of weeks and months, Bill. Well, for those listeners who aren't familiar with your work, certainly you've been submitting your work to Silver Doctors, and if you can tell them where to find it originally posted, it's at jsmindset.com, correct?
Right. It's www.jsmindset.com.
Working with the highly esteemed Jim Sinclair.
Right. My pleasure to do so. He's a really smart guy. I'm learning a bunch from him.
He certainly is. All right. Well, we appreciate the time, Bill. It's great to have you on the show.
I appreciate you having me.
All right. Bill Holter from jsmindset.com in collaboration with Jim Sinclair. Thanks for tuning in to silverdoctors.com.